Welcome to the latest offering from the Buddhist Audio Bookshelf YouTube channel. Today, we embark on a profound journey through Empty Cloud, a masterpiece that encapsulates the teachings of the Venerable Zhu Yun. This audiobook is a treasure trove of wisdom, compassion, and spiritual guidance. If you're not already subscribed, we invite you to join our community. Your subscription, along with likes and shares, plays a crucial role in expanding the reach of these teachings, making them accessible to a global audience. As a friendly reminder, the complete video playlist is thoughtfully provided in the video description, ensuring easy access to the entire journey. Let's unite in our commitment to sharing the teachings of Zhu Yun and fostering a world enriched with profound knowledge and enlightenment. Together, we can make a difference. Thank you for your dedication to this spiritual voyage. All right, shall we dive in this lovely book? Empty Cloud. The Teachings of Zhu Yun. A remembrance of the great Chinese Zen master. As compiled from the notes and recollections of Jai Din Shakya and related to Chuan Yuan Shakya and Abasaka Richard Chun. Preface. Remembering Master Zhu Yun. By Jai Din Shakya. The master's name, Zhu Yun, is translated into English as Empty Cloud, a translation which often confuses people. We all know what a cloud is, but what, we wonder, is meant by empty? In Chan, pronounced Zhen, or Zen literature, the term empty appears so often and with so many variations of definition that I will begin by trying to clarify its meaning. To be empty means to be empty of ego, to be without any thought of self. Not in the sense that one functions as a vegetable or a wild animal, living things which merely process water, food and sunlight in order to grow and reproduce, but in the sense that one ceases to gauge the events, the persons, the places, and the things of one's environment in terms of I or me or mine. A person who is empty of self seldom has occasion even to use these pronouns. Let me be more specific. We have all heard about a parent or friend or lover who claims to be completely unselfish in his love for another. A husband will say, "I kept nothing for myself. I gave everything to her, my wife." This man is not empty. He has merely projected a part of his identity upon another person. A person who is truly empty possesses nothing, not even a consciousness of self. His interests lie not with his own needs and desires, for indeed, he is unaware of any such considerations, but only with the welfare of others. He does not evaluate people as being likable or unlikable, worthy or unworthy, or as useful or useless. He neither appreciates nor depreciates anyone. He simply understands that the great Buddha Amitabha, the Buddha of infinite light and goodness, dwells within every human being, and it is in the interest of this Buddha self that he invests himself. Attaining such emptiness is never easy. An old Chan story illustrates this. A Chan master once undertook the instruction of a novice who was having great difficulty in detaching himself from the persons of his former secular life. "You cannot serve the Dharma until you sever these bonds," said the master. "You must destroy these possessive relationships. Kill them. Regard them as if they no longer existed." The novice asked, "But my parents? Must I slay them, too?" And the master replied, "Who are they to be spared?" "And you, master," said the novice, "must I kill you, too?" And the master smiled and said, "Don't worry. There is not enough of me left for you to get your hands on." Such a master was Zhu Yun. There was not enough of him left for anyone to grasp. In 1940, the Japanese Imperial Air Force bombed Nanhua Monastery, in which he sat meditating, but they could not get their hands on him. In 1951, when he was an old man of 93, cadres of communist thugs beat him repeatedly, but although they broke his bones and did succeed in killing younger, stronger priests, they could not get their hands on him, either. There was not enough of him left for anyone to grasp. How can the Buddha self be killed? Zhu Yun would not die until he was ready to die, until he accomplished the tasks which he had set for himself. I will tell you about this remarkable man, this empty cloud whose presence so defined my life. I will tell you things that I remember, and I will do my best to transmit to you his Dharma teachings. Perhaps if you learn from him you will be able to experience some of the joy I knew from knowing him. To be in Zuyun's presence was to be in the morning mist of a sunny day, or in one of those clouds that linger at the top of a mountain. A person can reach out and try to grab the mist, but no matter how hard he tries to snatch it, his hand always remains empty. Yet, no matter how desiccated his spirit is, the empty cloud will envelop it with life-giving moisture, or no matter how his spirit burns with anger or disappointment, a soothing coolness will settle over him, like gentle dew. This is the empty cloud of Zuyun that still lingers with us. Time and the sun cannot destroy it, for it is the sun itself, just as it is also eternal. Now I will tell you some of the history he and I share. During the 1920s, when I was still a boy, Zuyun had not yet come to Nanhua Monastery, the monastery which Wei Neng, the sixth patriarch of Chan, had founded near the town of Shaoguan, where I lived. Shaoguan lies about 100 miles north of Guangzhou, Canton, in Guangdong province, which is in the south of China. In all the centuries since its founding in 675 AD, Nanhua Monastery had gone through cycles of neglect and restoration, but when I was a boy, it was definitely in one of its neglected phases. As I can clearly remember, it was much more like a playground than the shrine it is today. In those days, Shaoguan was a sleepy little river town, a place with not much for kids to do. Going out to Nanhua Monastery was our equivalent of a trip to Disneyland. What made this monastery playground even more exciting to visit was that no one seemed to be in charge of it. About 100 monks and a few dozen nuns lived there, but mostly they busied themselves with bickering. Nuns argued with nuns. Monks argued with monks. Nuns argued with monks. And the buildings of this great religious center were merely the places in which all these arguments took place. It didn't seem to matter that the wood was rotting, and the stonework was crumbling, and the ironwork of the old red and white pagoda was rusting. The decay had merely kept pace with the decline in monastic discipline. Devout Buddhists, like my parents, would visit and put money in the donation boxes, and if the unruly boys they brought with them, like my older brother and me, climbed on ancient structures, or played hide-and-seek behind a sacred statuary, or ran through hallowed hallways, well, nobody objected. To have restrained us from enjoying ourselves might have restrained the donations. I suppose the monks figured that they already had to suffer with dilapidated buildings, so why should they risk worsening their problems with financial shortages? So we always had a good time whenever we went to Nanhua. We'd run across the Kaoxi, Shaozai River Bridge and climb one of the nearby mountains in which there was a natural stone niche. The sixth patriarch was said to have meditated in this niche. We'd sit in it and laugh, imitating his pious posture. No wonder that the sixth patriarch appeared to Zuyun in a vision and begged him to go to Nanhua Monastery to straighten out the mess it had become. I didn't meet Zuyun until 1934 when I was 17 years old and he was in his 60s. He looked then just like the photograph I have reproduced at the beginning of the text. I'll tell you about this meeting. But in order to appreciate it, you'll need to know a little more of my background. My family name is Feng. Originally my family came from Fujian province, but my father moved to Shaoguan, and that is where my older brother and I were born and raised. By local standards my family was considered rich. My father owned 2 businesses. A building materials and supply business and a commercial shop in which he sold dried food such as mushrooms, scallions, and other varieties of vegetables. I suppose my parents originally hoped that one day my brother would take over one business and I would take over the other. But my brother's talents were not in any of the academic pursuits, and my parents soon began to worry about his abilities. When I was 4 years old I began to study with the private tutors they had engaged to educate him. He was then 2 years ahead of me. But I learned quickly and began skipping grades until I was ahead of my brother. So, at the conclusion of the 6-year primary school education, although I was 2 years younger than my brother, I was graduated 2 years ahead of him. I then entered secondary or intermediate school. The school I attended was named Li Kun, which means a school that encourages people. It was a Roman Catholic school and all the teachers were Catholic priests and nuns. It was considered the best school in the area. But the study of Christianity was more or less optional, and in my case, it was definitely more less than more. All I really cared about was ball playing. If you could throw it, kick it, bounce it, or hit it, I was interested. In intermediate school, that's what I felt most encouraged to do. But I attended to my studies sufficiently to gain admittance to a 3-year education college. I didn't feel much like selling dried vegetables, so I thought I'd become a teacher. And there I was, in 1934, a cocky kid of 17, a smart aleck, you'd say, who one holiday went out, as usual, to Nanhua Monastery, with all the other teenaged boys and girls to have some fun. I had never even heard of Zuyun, and I certainly didn't expect to discover that a holy man had just come to Nanhua. And there he was. Something happened to me when I looked into his face. I suddenly dropped to my knees and pressed my forehead against the ground, kowtowing to him. My friends were all astonished. I had never kowtowed to anybody in my life, and there I was, inexplicably, with no suggestion from anyone that I do so, humbling myself before him. Filled with awe and wonder, I kowtowed to Zuyun 3 times in succession. The great master smiled at me and asked, "Who are you and where are you from?" I barely whispered, "I'm Feng Guohua, and I come from Shaoguan." And Zuyun smiled again and said, "Enjoy yourself here at Nanhua Temple." He was surrounded by many other monks who looked on silently. I suppose they didn't know what to make of it, either. Now I couldn't wait until I returned to Nanhua, but not to have fun. I wanted to see Zuyun again. The second time I saw him, he asked me if I wished to take Buddhist precepts, that is to say, formally to become a Buddhist. I said, yes, of course. And so I received the precepts from Zuyun. He gave me the name Quan Xiu, which means big and wide practice. No more soccer, basketball, or even ping pong. Now, during my summer vacation, I traveled the 20 miles or so out to Nanhua Monastery twice each week. I'd take the train to Ma Ba Mountain, a landmark rock formation, and then I'd walk 4 miles to the monastery. Zuyun gave me books about Buddhism to study, and that is how I spent my vacation time. For the first time in my life, I felt religion in my heart. I wanted to become a priest. But my sudden religious conversion caused confusion at home. Things there were not so simple. In the first place, when I was born, my parents went to a famous astrologer to have my natal horoscope cast. This astrologer clearly saw in the stars that I would become a high-ranking military officer, and that I would die by the time I was 30. Having a dead hero in the family was an honor that they'd just as soon pass up. They therefore were happy that I did so well in school. That meant that the family businesses would be safe in my hands, especially since it was becoming more and more apparent that the businesses wouldn't do too well in my brother's hands. When my parents finally learned of my desire to become a priest, as Buddhists, they received the news happily, but as businessmen, they were very apprehensive. The wrong son had desired to become a priest. But before I actually felt called to the priesthood, I had had other intentions about my future. I had never put any credence in the astrologer's predictions, so, being a little bored with the prospect of becoming a school teacher, I decided that after I finished education college, I'd go ahead and enter Chiang Kai-shek's military school, Wampao Academy, in Canton. Chiang was commandant of Wampao in those days. Because of this ambition of mine, my brother was forced to prepare himself as best he could to take over the family businesses. Fortunately, or unfortunately, he never had to prove himself in the commercial world. After the Japanese invasion came the Communist Revolution and there were no businesses left to take over. But in 1934, when I was 17, and in my first year of education college, the war with Japan had not yet begun. Zuyun, with the foresight of the truly wise, immediately discouraged my military ambitions. Actually, I had abandoned that idea the day I met him. I wanted to become a priest, but I didn't communicate this desire to anyone because I thought that it would sound vain and frivolous. To me it would have seemed less conceited to say that I wanted to become a general than to say that I wanted to become a priest. But later on, in one of my many private talks with Zhu Yun, I did confess to him my hope to one day become a priest. He simply said that he wanted me to stay in college and complete my education. Afterwards we'd talk about the priesthood. In 1937, I was graduated from Education College. That autumn, at the Mid-Autumn Festival in mid-September, or the 8th month full moon by the Chinese calendar, I had my head shaved. Immediately I moved into Nanhua Monastery as a resident novice and awaited the ordination ceremony which would take place in 3 months' time. And sure enough, I and 200 other monks were ordained at the mid-December 1937 ordination ceremony. It was on this occasion that Master Zhu Yun gave me the name Jai Din, which means to understand and achieve peace. He also gave me many of his old garments which I felt very privileged to wear. Shortly after I became a monk, the Japanese invaded China, and I began to suspect that Zhu Yun had had a premonition that he had deliberately discouraged me from attending military school because he feared that if I became an army officer, I might also become an army casualty. He had other work for me to accomplish. And Zhu Yun was a man for whom the word failure did not exist. He had goals, and to him, I was one of the instruments he would use to achieve his goals. Life at Nanhua Monastery was hard. The monks and nuns raised their own vegetables, did their own cooking and cleaning, and even sewed their own clothes. They slept on wooden planks that were covered only by a thin grass mat. Money was obtained from charitable donations and from rents received from tenant farmers who leased monastery land. When Zhu Yun arrived at Nanhua in 1934, he knew that there could be no happiness there until discipline was restored. He therefore established strict rules and regulations. The first time someone broke a rule, he or she was punished. The second time that person broke a rule, he or she was dismissed. Zhu Yun departmentalized all of the various jobs and duties and established a hierarchy, an ascending order of responsibility, to oversee each department. Everybody had to do his job, and Zhu Yun tolerated no laxity. He had a strong stick which he carried with him wherever he went, and he was not afraid to use it. Amazingly, all of the arguments and misbehavior ceased. Law and order brought peace. It was not enough, however, to restore monastic discipline. Zhu Yun knew that the monastery buildings also had to be restored. Although my father did not supply any of the building materials, another company received the contract. He did donate money to support the rebuilding project. Fortunately, the dormitory buildings were the first to be restored, and everyone who lived at Nanhua was able to appreciate the improvement in accommodations. In 1938, Master Zhu Yun was invited to come to Hong Kong, where Cantonese is spoken, for a long series of instructional talks and services. Since Master spoke Hunan, a northern dialect, and I spoke both Hunan and Cantonese, it was necessary that I accompany him in order to act as interpreter. While we were there, the Japanese attacked Shanghai, to the north, and Nanjing, to the south. The casualties in Shanghai were staggering and, as far as Nanjing was concerned, the attacks there were so terrible that to this day the attack is known as the infamous rape of Nanjing, because of the deliberate slaughter of so many innocent civilians. Because there were so few roads out of Nanjing and these were all dangerous, many refugees tried to escape the Japanese invaders by taking river routes. Naturally, because the city of Shaoguan is located at the confluence of two rivers, many boatloads of refugees arrived there. When Zhu Yun learned of the attacks on Shanghai and Nanjing, he anticipated this refugee crisis and immediately concluded the talks in Hong Kong. He and I returned to Nanhua and began a program of refugee assistance. Zhu Yun decreed that the monks of Nanhua adopt the ancient Buddhist custom, still followed by Theravadan orders, of eating only 2 meals a day, breakfast and lunch. No food of any kind could be taken after the noon hour. The food that would have been eaten was donated to the refugees and, when necessary, to Chinese soldiers. Because of the people's great distress, Zhu Yun held many additional religious services for the dead and injured. These services helped to bring hope and consolation to many anguished souls. But to Zhu Yun, a goal was a goal, and not even the Japanese invasion would deter him from restoring Nanhua Monastery. The rebuilding program, therefore, continued. In 1939, the famous directional king statues were created, and the temple for their housing was built. The official installation ceremony was held in 1940. The rebuilding effort had a salutary effect on everyone's morale. It provided a sense of purpose and futurity. Now I will tell you about the bombing of Nanhua Monastery to which I earlier referred. After the Japanese attacked Nanjing and Shanghai, governors from 14 Chinese provinces, states, held a series of meetings at Nanhua Monastery in an attempt to develop a coordinated defensive policy and strategy for resisting the Japanese invaders. These meetings were supposed to be top secret, but the Japanese, who had established an airbase at Guangzhou, Canton City, quickly learned about them. Of course, though later everyone tried to blame the security leak on spies within one or another governor's staff, the fact is that, in the way that politicians usually are, nobody took much trouble to conceal the meetings. The governors and their entourages arrived splendidly in limousines. There was enough dazzling chromium in Nanhua's parking lot to attract the attention of someone on Mars. The Japanese in Guangzhou, certainly, had no trouble in targeting this secret political meeting place. Therefore, in an effort to destroy so many important civilian leaders in one strike, the Japanese sent 3 fighter bombers north to attack Nanhua Monastery. When the planes began to bomb and strafe the monastery complex, Zhu Yun immediately ordered everyone to take cover and to remain calm. He sent the governors into the 6th Patriarch's temple and the monks into the larger Ming temple. He, himself, calmly went into the most obvious target, the meditation hall, to pray for everyone's safety. In the first run, one of the 2 men who were assigned to guard the governor's cars was killed. He had left his post and had taken cover in a large sewer pipe that was destined to be used in the rebuilding project, and one of the bombs fell on the sewer pipe, killing him. Ironically, the other guard remained at his post in the very visible guardhouse, and he escaped injury. Another bomb whistled down to earth and struck just outside the monastery walls, destroying a large Joshu cedar tree and creating a hole in the ground that is still there today, filled with water, like a small pond. But then, after Zhu Yun entered the meditation hall and began to pray, a miracle occurred. 2 of the 3 bombers crashed into each other and fell to earth at Ma Ba Mountain. The remaining airplane immediately returned to its base in Guangzhou. Naturally, the mid-air crash was credited to Zhu Yun's spiritual power. All the Chinese who knew him had no doubt about this, but what is more important, the Japanese evidently began to believe it, too. Governors or no governors, they never again attempted to bomb Nanhua. The Japanese pressed the war into the interior, and at the end of 1944, they finally succeeded in taking the city of Shaoguan. But even then, despite being so close to Nanhua, they did not attack it. We believed that they feared the spiritual power of Zhu Yun. Throughout the occupation, they never permitted their occupation soldiers to disturb the sanctity of the monastery. But to return to my story, in 1940, Wei Yin, the man who would one day succeed Zhu Yun as abbot of Nanhua Monastery, became a monk. It was my honor to shave his head and to give him his name Wei Yin, which means the Dharma seal of cause and effect. His secondary name was Zhai Gua, which means know the results. In other words, determine an action's cause and its effect, and you will obtain the desired results. Wei Yin stayed at Nanhua Monastery to assist Zhu Yun with the additional burdens of helping the war victims. Also that year, knowing of the disrepair and disorder into which the once great Yunmen Monastery had fallen, Zhu Yun sent me there to help restore order and to oversee the building restoration. For this task Zhu Yun elevated me to the rank of master. It was necessary that I pass many Japanese soldiers during my 2-day walk to Yunmen Monastery. But again, Zhu Yun's influence was so great that it extended even to me, and no soldier dared to interfere with my passage. Having safely arrived, I took up residence at Yunmen. At Anshiashan, the third great monastery in the Shaoguan area. There were no problems with the Japanese. This monastery's remote location discouraged military activity, and Master Ben Wen was able to maintain monastic peace and discipline. I remained at Yunmen Monastery until 1944, when Zhu Yun decided to establish a Buddhist college at Nanhua in order to teach the ancient Vinaya monastic code to all those who would become monks and nuns. Now I could understand Zhu Yun's goal and his advice to me to stay in college. My teaching degree qualified me to supervise the organization of this new Vinaya school and also to become one of the teachers. Because Zhu Yun believed in the necessity of providing children with a good education, he also decided to establish a primary school at Nanhua. He wanted this school to be a first-rate institution, and, in short order, students from many parts of China came to Nanhua to be educated. Naturally, rich parents donated money for their children's tuition, books, and school supplies, and also for their room and board. But Zhu Yun believed that all children, rich or poor, deserved to be educated, and so poor children were permitted to attend this fine school without cost of any kind. Zhu Yun provided them with books and school supplies and whatever food and lodging they required. I regarded my responsibilities at the school as sacred and did my best to perform my duties with great devotion and care. Everyone associated with the school felt the same way as I, and because of all our untiring efforts, the school quickly gained its reputation for excellence. While Master Wei Yin and I resided at Nanhua, Zhu Yun went to live at Yunmen Temple in order to continue the supervision of the temple reconstruction. Then the direction of my Dharma path took another turn. Many Chinese people had moved to Hawaii, especially during the war years. But though there were many Chinese Buddhists living in Hawaii, which was then only an American territory, there was no Buddhist temple or even any priests to teach and to conduct services. These Chinese Hawaiians repeatedly sent delegations to Hong Kong, asking that priests be sent to Hawaii to serve the people and also to supervise the construction of a temple. Naturally, they wanted Zhu Yun to come to Honolulu to create the new temple, but Zhu Yun had dedicated himself to the restoration of Yunmen Monastery, and so he decided to send me in his place. In 1949, I completed the first stage of this mission when I arrived in Hong Kong and initiated the necessary immigration procedures. I would not arrive in Honolulu until 1956. Hawaii became a state in 1959, but our temple, which I named Zhu Yun Temple, was the first Buddhist temple in Hawaii. Not long after I arrived in Hong Kong in 1949, the Chinese Civil War ended, and the Communists took control of the government. Cadres of communist thugs, supposing that churches and temples were repositories of hidden gold and other valuables, marched on the defenseless religious buildings and demanded that the clergymen turn over these non-existent treasures to them. In 1951, while I was in Hong Kong, a cadre of these thugs came to Yunmen Monastery and demanded that Zhu Yun give them the temple's gold and valuables. Zhu Yun tried to explain that there were no such valuables at Yunmen Monastery. But they refused to believe him, and one by one, they beat the monks in an effort to force a disclosure of the treasure's location. One monk was actually beaten to death, several monks disappeared and their bodies were never found. Many suffered serious injuries such as broken arms and ribs. During the 3 months the thugs occupied the monastery, they would regularly interrogate and beat Zhu Yun, and then throw him into a small dark room for days, depriving him of food and water. Several times he was beaten into senselessness and left for dead. But despite the numerous internal injuries and broken bones this old man of 93 had sustained, he exercised his enormous willpower and refused to relinquish his life until he had completed his mission. He knew that his living presence, if only to a small degree, was serving to restrain the attackers. He also knew that for so long as he remained alive, he could inspire his followers, and in those difficult times they needed all the inspiration they could get. Determining that his will to survive must be greater than his attackers' will to destroy him, Zhu Yun, though physically frail, was yet indomitable, and he recovered despite the tortures to which they had subjected him. Though the thugs had tried to keep secret their treatment of this holy man, news of his torture soon reached the outside world, and Chinese people from around the globe complained bitterly to the Beijing government. It was unthinkable that Japanese invaders would respect the priesthood in the monasteries, but that the Chinese militia would violate them. The Beijing authorities sent a delegation immediately to Yunmen, but because Zhu Yun feared reprisals, he refused to file any formal complaints. As soon as he had regained his strength, however, he made the difficult journey to Beijing and personally petitioned the government to restrain these cadres. He insisted that they ordered that all religious institutions be respected, that the clergy be left unmolested, and that the Chinese people be permitted to practice freedom of religion. The authorities, fearing perhaps the power of his now legendary reputation, relented, and for a time, at least during the remaining years of Zhu Yun's life, the government's policy became more tolerant towards religion. The government would not, however, tolerate further criticism of any kind from outside sources, and so all lines of communication were severed. In Hong Kong, I desperately tried to get news about Zhu Yun's fate, but it was impossible to learn anything. I wrote numerous letters, but none was answered. However, as is customary, I continued to send Zhu Yun copies of all of the essays and articles on Buddhism that I had written. In happier days, according to custom, I would have received comments from him. But in those unhappy days, none of my submissions to him were acknowledged. Then in 1952, I wrote a dissertation on the Heart Sutra that was particularly well received. The government in Beijing decided to permit its publication. I immediately wrote to the publisher in Beijing expressing my great desire to learn of my master's response to the dissertation. Miraculously, one of the clerks in the publisher's office decided to hand-carry my letter and dissertation directly to Zhu Yun and to await his reply. Zhu Yun read both, then he told the clerk that he approved of the dissertation and sent me his blessing. His words were relayed to me, and this indirect communication was the last I ever had with my beloved master. On October 13, 1959, at the age of 101, Master Zhu Yun entered final nirvana. The news of his death saddened me beyond description. Publicly, I held special memorial services and wrote an epitaph for him, but privately, I was overwhelmed with sorrow. For days I wept and could not eat or sleep. I knew how very much I owed him. I knew that in his wisdom he foresaw the threat to our Chinese Buddhist Dharma, the Dharma of Wei Neng and Lin Jai and Han Shan. He wanted this Dharma transplanted to the United States where it would be safe, and he had given me the honor of doing this. The manner of Zhu Yun's death also caused me to appreciate even more the power of his great heart. I understood clearly that he was able to transcend physical existence and to postpone his entrance into final nirvana until he was ready to make this last journey, until he had fulfilled his sacred obligation to use his influence to protect all clergymen in China. I and other Buddhist clergy, along with many clergymen of other religious faiths, owe our lives to Zhu Yun's devotion to the Buddha Amitabha and to his unshakable conviction that this glorious presence dwells within the hearts of all human beings. Shanti. 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 Amitofo. Amitabha. Chapter 1. Introduction. Dear friends, let me tell you a little story a wise man once told me. He said, "Once I found myself in an unfamiliar country, walking down a strange street. I looked around trying to get my bearings, and seeing two men who were standing nearby, I approached them. Wheremi? I asked. Who are you people? The first man replied, This is the world of samsara, and in this world I happen to be the very tallest dwarf there is. And the other man replied, Yes, and I happen to be the shortest giant. This encounter left me very confused because, you see, both men were exactly the same height. I preface my remarks to you with this little story because I want to emphasize at the outset how important it is to consider the perception of things. Wei Neng, the sixth and last patriarch of our Chan path, once came upon two monks who were arguing about a banner that was waving in the wind. The first monk said, "It is the banner that is moving." The other monk said, "No. It is the wind that is moving." The sixth patriarch admonished them both. "Good sirs," he said, "it is your mind that is doing all the moving." In the world of samsara, man is the measure of all things. Everything is relative. Everything is changing. Only in the real world, the world of nirvana, is there constancy. In Chan, our task is to discriminate not between the false and the false, but between the false and the real. Differences in outward appearance do not matter at all. The real world is inside us. It is even inside our mind. Now it is my happy task to help you to gain entrance into the real world, the world in which there are no dwarfs and giants and meaningless arguments. In the real world there is only peace, and joy, and truth, and freedom from the nagging desire for troublesome illusions. Dear friends, every human being possesses two self-natures, an apparent one and a real one. The apparent one is our small self or ego, which is everywhere different from all other small selves. The real one is our great Buddha self, which is everywhere the same. Our small self exists in the apparent world, the world of samsara. Our Buddha self exists in the real world, the world of nirvana. Both worlds are located in the same place. In the Heart Sutra we read, form is not different from emptiness, and emptiness is not different from form. Everyone wants to know, how can samsara and nirvana be the same? How can illusion be the same as reality? How can I be me and the Buddha, too? These are good questions. Every Buddhist needs to know the answer to them. The answer lies in the way we perceive reality. If we perceive reality directly, we see it in its nirvanic purity. If we perceive it indirectly through our ego consciousness, we see it in its samsaric distortion. Why is our view of reality flawed? Samsara is the world our small self thinks it sees and apprehends with its senses. Sometimes we just make mistakes. If a man were walking in the woods and came upon a coil of rope on the path and he thought the rope was a snake, he'd quickly run away. To him that rope was a snake and he'd react accordingly. When he returned home he'd likely tell everyone about that dangerous snake that almost bit him in the woods. His fear was genuine. His reason for being afraid was not. This small ego self also misperceives reality whenever it imposes arbitrary aesthetic or moral judgments upon it. If one woman sees another woman who is wearing a green hat and says, "I see a woman who is wearing a green hat," there is no problem. But if she says, "I see a woman who is wearing an ugly green hat," she is making a samsaric judgment. Somebody else might find that hat beautiful. But in reality, it is neither beautiful nor ugly. It merely is. Likewise, when a fox kills a rabbit, this, to the bunnies who will starve to death because their mother has been killed, is a very evil act. But to the hungry fox cubs who eat the rabbit that their mother has brought them, this same event is decidedly good. In reality, the event is neither good nor evil. It merely is. Reality is also misinterpreted because both the observer and that which is being observed are constantly changing. There is no precise moment in which a bud becomes a bloom, or a bloom becomes a fruit, or a fruit becomes a seed, or a seed, a budding tree. All these changes are subtle and continuous. We cannot step into the same river twice, for the water is constantly flowing. We, also, are not the same person from one minute to the next. Constantly we acquire new information and new experiences as we simultaneously forget old information and old experiences. Yesterday we can recall what we had for dinner the evening before. Tomorrow, we will no longer be privileged to recall that menu, unless perhaps it was a sumptuous feast of some kind, or else we always eat the same food and can say with certainty, it was rice and bean curd. The illusion of life is the opposite of the illusion of the cinema. In the cinema, a series of individual images are run together to form the illusion of continuous movement. In life, we intercept continuous motion, isolate and freeze an image, and then name and fix it, as though it were a concrete individual object or event. We don't always agree on fixing the moment in time. What is a young woman? If a man is 90 years old, lots of women are young women. Well, we may have a better idea of why our small self misperceives reality, but still we wonder, Why do we have two selves in the first place? The answer is simply because we are human beings. Our small self provides us with that conscious sense of continuing identity that allows each of us to know, I am today who I was yesterday, and will be again tomorrow. Without it, we could not organize the sensory data that assail us. Without it, we would have no sense of belonging or of being connected to others. We would have no parents or family to call our own, no spouse or children, no teachers or friends to guide and encourage us. Our small self gives us our human nature. As we grow, we discover that our lifeline's thread is not a long continuous strand, with each event separately strung on it like beads on a rosary. No, the thread weaves itself into a net, an interdependent array of knots. We cannot remove a single knot without affecting the others. We cannot pull out a single line of our history without, perhaps, altering the entire course of it. This network of information and experience, of conditioning and association, of memory and misunderstanding, soon becomes a complicated and bewildering tangle, and we become confused about our place in the scheme of things. When we are young, we see ourselves at the center of our universe, but as we get older, we are no longer certain of our position or our identity. We think, I am not the person I was when I was 10 years old, but neither am I anybody different. We soon wonder, who am I? Our ego self has led us into this confusion. Confusion leads to calamity, and then life, as the Buddha noted in his first noble truth, becomes bitter and painful. How do we clear up this confusion? We turn our consciousness around. We reject the outward world's complexity in favor of the inward world's simplicity. Instead of trying to gain power and glory for our small ego self, we turn our consciousness inward to discover the glory of our Buddha self. Instead of making ourselves wretched seeking to be a master of others, we find joy and contentment in being one with our Buddha self, and in serving others. Dear friends, the purpose of chant training is to clarify our vision, so that we can gain insight into our true identities. Chant enables us to transcend our human nature and realize our Buddha nature. Centuries ago, our Chan meditation sect was founded and formed by two great men. The first patriarch, Bodhidharma, who came to China from the West, and Wei Neng, the Chinese-born sixth patriarch. Because of these two men, Chan flourished, spreading throughout China and into many distant lands. Now, what were the most important teachings of Bodhidharma and Wei Neng? Rid the mind of egotism. Free it of defiling thoughts. If these directives are not followed, there can be no success in Chan practice. The Chan path lies before you. Follow it. It will deliver you to peace, joy, truth and freedom. Chapter 2. Chan training. Many people begin Chan training by thinking, well, since all is Maya or samsaric illusion, it doesn't matter what I do or how I do it. The only thing that's important is gaining nirvana. So, since there's no such thing as good or evil, I'll do what I want. It does matter what we do. Chan is a branch of the Buddhist religion, and as Buddhists, we must adhere to ethical precepts. Samsara or no samsara, we obey the precepts. And in addition to this, we also follow the strict rules of discipline which govern our training. Let's start with the training rules. While there are many different methods that may be followed, before beginning any of them, a practitioner must meet 4 basic requirements. He or she must 2. Accept the rules of discipline. 3. Maintain an unshakable faith in the existence of the Buddha self. 4. Be determined to succeed in whichever method he chooses. I will explain each of these 4 prerequisites. First, the law of causality simply states that evil produces evil, and good produces good. A poison tree yields poison fruit, while a healthy tree yields good. Conceptually, this appears to be simple, but in actuality it is rather complex. Evil deeds are a vile investment. They guarantee a return in pain, bitterness, anxiety and remorse. There is no profit to be had from actions that spring from greed, lust, anger, pride, laziness, or jealousy. All such motivations merely serve the ego's ambitions. Evil deeds can never promote spiritual fulfillment. they only guarantee spiritual penury. On the other hand, good deeds, provided they are not done conditionally as an investment that will yield some future reward, will bring to the doer of them peace and spiritual fulfillment. An egoless good deed is very different from a contrived good deed. On the surface, the effect may seem the same, help or kindness that is needed is given. But the person who helps another with the hidden expectation of receiving some future benefit usually does evil, not good. Let me illustrate this point. In China there was once a prince who loved birds. Whenever he found an injured bird, he would feed and nurse it back to health, and then, when the bird had regained its strength, he would set it free with much rejoicing. Naturally, he grew quite famous for his talent as a loving healer of wounded birds. Whenever an injured bird was found anywhere in his kingdom, the bird would quickly be brought to him, and he would express his gratitude to the thoughtful person who brought it. But then, in order to curry the prince's favor, people soon began to catch birds and to deliberately injure them so that they could take them to the palace. So many birds were killed in the course of capture and maiming that his kingdom became a hell for birds. When the prince saw how much harm his goodness was causing, he decreed that no wounded bird should ever be helped. When people saw that there was no profit to be gained from helping birds, they ceased harming them. Sometimes it happens that our experiences are like this prince's. Sometimes, when we think we're doing the most good, we learn to our chagrin that we're actually causing the most harm. Perform a good deed in silence and anonymity. Forget about rejoicing. A good deed should have a very short life, and once dead, should be quickly buried. Let it rest in peace. Don't keep trying to resuscitate it. Too often, we try to turn a good deed into a ghost that haunts people, that keeps reminding them of our wonderful service, just in case they start to forget. But what happens when we are the recipient of someone else's kindness? Well, then, we ought to let that good deed gain immortality. Letting someone else's good deeds live is much more difficult than letting our own good deeds die. Let me illustrate this too. There once was a grocer, a kind and decent man who valued all his customers. He cared for them and wanted them all to be healthy and well-fed. He kept his prices so low that he did not earn much money, not even enough to hire someone to help him in his little shop. He worked very hard in his honest poverty, but he was happy. One day a customer came and told him a sad story. Her husband had been injured and would not be able to work for several months. She had no money to buy food for him and for their children. Without food, she wept, we will all die. The grocer sympathized with her and agreed to extend credit to her. Each week I'll provide you with rice for 7 days and vegetables for 4 days, he said, and that surely will be enough to sustain your family's health, and then, when your husband returns to work, you can keep to the same menu while paying off your account. Before you know it, you'll all be eating vegetables 7 days a week. The woman was so grateful. Every week she received rice for 7 days and vegetables for 4. But when her husband returned to work, she had to decide whether to pay off her old debt while continuing to eat vegetables only 4 days a week, or to patronize a new grocer and eat vegetables 7 days a week. She chose the latter and justified her failure to pay her debt by telling people that her former grocer had sold her rotten vegetables. How often, when we want something badly, do we promise that if we are given what we desire, we will dedicate our lives to demonstrate our gratitude? But then, once we receive what we so ardently sought, our pledge weakens and dies, almost automatically. We quickly bury it, without ceremony. This is not the Chan way. And so, just as a farmer who sows soybeans does not expect to harvest melons, we must not expect, whenever we commit selfish or immoral or injurious acts, to harvest spiritual purity. Neither can we hope to hide from our misdeeds by removing ourselves from the location in which we committed them, or to assume that time will expunge the record of them. Never may we suppose that if we just ignore our misdeeds long enough, people whom we have injured will conveniently die, taking to the grave with them our need to atone for the damage we have caused. It is our good deeds that we must bury, not our victims or broken promises. We may not think that because there is no witness around to question us, we will not have to answer for our misdeeds. Many old Buddhist stories illustrate this principle. Let me tell you a few of my favorites. During the generation that preceded Shakyamuni Buddha's life on earth, many of his Shakya clansmen were brutally massacred by the wicked king, Viradhaka, the so-called Crystal King. Why did this terrible event occur? Well, it so happened that near Kapila, the Shakya city in which the Buddha was born, there was a large pond and, on the shore of that pond, there was a small village. Nobody remembers the name of the village. One year a great drought occurred. The crops withered, and the villagers couldn't think of anything else to do but kill and eat the fish that lived in the pond. They caught every fish except one. This last fish was captured by a boy who played with the wretched creature by bouncing it on its head. That's what he was doing when the villagers took it from him and killed it. Then the rains came again and everywhere in the kingdom life returned to normal. People got married and had children. One of those children was Siddhartha, the Buddha, who was born in the city of Kapila, near that village and pond. Siddhartha grew up and preached the Dharma, gaining many followers. Among these followers was the king of Shravasti, King Prasenajit. This king married a Shakya girl, and the two of them produced a son, Prince Viradhaka, the Crystal One. The royal couple decided to raise the prince in Kapila, the Buddha city. At first, everything was fine. Prince Viradhaka was a healthy baby, and before long he grew into a nice strong boy. But before he was even ready to start school, a momentous event occurred. It happened that one day, during the Buddha's absence from Kapila, the young prince climbed up onto the Buddha's honored chair and began to play there. He meant no harm, he was just a child playing. But oh! When the Buddha's clansmen saw the prince playing in this sacred place, they became very angry and reprimanded the prince and dragged him down from the chair, humiliating and punishing him. How can a child understand the foolishness of zealots? Adults can't figure it out. It's really quite mysterious. Their harsh treatment served only to embitter the prince and to cause him to hate all his Shakya clansmen. It was their harsh treatment that started him on his career of cruelty and vengeance. Eventually, the prince, by killing his own father, it is said, was able to ascend the throne of Shravasti. Now, as King Viradhaka, the Crystal King, he was finally able to take revenge against the Shakya clan. Leading his own soldiers, he began to attack the city of Kapila. When the Buddha's clansmen came to tell him about the impending massacre, they found him suffering from a terrible headache. They begged him to intervene and rescue the people of Kapila from the Crystal King's brutal attack, but the Buddha, groaning in pain, refused to help. A fixed karma cannot be changed, he said. The clansmen then turned to Moggallana, one of the Buddha's most powerful disciples, and begged for his assistance. He listened to their sad complaint and, moved to pity, decided to assist the besieged citizens of Kapila. Using his supernatural abilities, Moggallana extended his miraculous bowl to the threatened Shakya and allowed 500 of them to climb into it. Then he raised the bowl high in the air, thinking that he had lifted them to safety. But when he again lowered the bowl, the 500 men had turned into a pool of blood. The dreadful sight so alarmed everyone that the Buddha decided to disclose the story of his ancestors, those villagers who had killed all the fish during the drought. This marauding army of soldiers that are now attacking Kapila had been those fish, he explained. The people of Kapila who are now being massacred were the people who killed those fish. The Crystal King, himself, was that last big fish. And who, do you think, the Buddha asked, holding a cold cloth against his forehead, was the boy who bounced that fish on its head. So, for killing the fish, the people suffered death. And for hurting that fish's head, the Buddha was now plagued with an awful headache. And what about Viradhaka, the Crystal King? Naturally, he was reborn in hell. And so, you see, there is no end to cause and effect. A cause produces an effect which itself becomes the cause of another effect. Action and reaction. Tribute and retribution. This is the law of causality. Sooner or later our evil deeds catch up with us. The only way to prevent the effect is to prevent the cause. We must learn to be forgiving, to overlook injury and insult, and to never seek revenge or even harbor any grudges. We must never become zealots, self-righteous and proud in our vain notions of piety and duty, and above all, we must always be gentle, especially with children. Let me tell you another cause and effect story. This one concerns Chan Master Bai Zhang, who actually was able to liberate a wild fox spirit. Very few people have been able to do that. It seems that one evening, after a Chan meeting had ended and all his disciples had retired, Master Bai Zhang noticed that an elderly man was lingering outside the meditation hall. Bai Zhang approached the man and asked, "Tell me, sir, who or what is it that you're seeking?" The elderly man replied, "No, not *sir'. I am not a human being at all. I am a wild fox who is merely inhabiting the body of a man." Bai Zhang was naturally very surprised and curious. "How did you get into this condition?" he asked. The elderly foxman explained, 500 years ago, I was the head monk of this monastery. One day, a junior monk came and asked me "When a man attains enlightenment, is he still subject to the law of causality?" And I boldly answered him "No, he is exempt from the law." My punishment for this false and arrogant answer was that my spirit was changed into the spirit of a wild fox, and so I ran off into the mountains. As a foxman I could not die, and, for so long as my ignorance remains, I must continue to live in this wretched condition. For 500 years I have been roaming the forest seeking the knowledge that will free me. Master, I beg you to be compassionate towards me and to enlighten me to the truth. Master Bai Zhang spoke gently to the foxman. Ask me the same question that the junior monk asked you, and I will give you the correct answer. The foxman complied. I wish to ask the master this. When a man attains enlightenment, is he still subject to the law of causality? Bai Zhang answered, yes. He is never exempt from the law. He may never close his eyes to the possibilities of cause and effect. He must remain aware of all his present and past actions. Suddenly the old foxman was enlightened and free. He prostrated himself before the master and thanked him profusely. At last, he said, I am liberated. Then, as he started to leave, he turned and asked Bai Zhang, Master, since I am a monk, would you kindly grant me the usual funeral rites for a monk? I live nearby, in a den on the mountain behind the monastery, and I will go there now to die. Bai Zhang agreed, and the next day he went to the mountain and located the den. But instead of finding an old monk there, Bai Zhang saw only a disturbance in the den's earthen floor. He probed this disturbance with his stick and discovered a dead fox. Well, a promise is a promise. Master Bai Zhang conducted the usual monk's funeral rites over the fox's body. Everyone thought Bai Zhang quite mad, especially when he led a solemn funeral procession with a dead fox on the bier. So you see, dear friends, even the attainment of Buddhahood does not exempt one from the law of causality. When even the Buddha can suffer a headache for having been unkind to a fish, how much more is our need to remain heedful of the principle that an injurious act, sooner or later, will bring us an injurious retribution. Be careful in what you say or do. Don't risk becoming a fox spirit. As to the second requirement, the strict observance of the rules of discipline, I will tell you sincerely that there can be no spiritual progress without morality and the fulfillment of religious duty. Discipline is the foundation upon which enlightenment rests. Discipline regulates our behavior and makes it unchanging. Steadiness becomes steadfastness, and it is this which produces wisdom. The Surangama Sutra clearly teaches us that mere accomplishment in meditation will not erase our impurities. Even if we were able to demonstrate great proficiency in meditation, still, without adherence to discipline, we would easily fall into Mara's evil realm of demons and heretics. A man or woman who is diligent in observing moral discipline and religious duty is protected and encouraged by sky dragons and angels, just as he is avoided and feared by demons from the underworld and heretics from everywhere. It once happened that in the state of Kashmir, a poisonous earth dragon lived in a cave near a monastery of 500 Theravada rats. This dragon terrorized the region and made people's lives miserable. Every day the rats would assemble, and together they would try to use the power of their collective meditation to drive away the dragon. But always they failed. The dragon simply would not leave. Then one day a Mahayana Chan monk happened to stop at the monastery. The Arhats complained about this terrible dragon and asked the monk to join them in meditation, to add the power of his meditation to theirs. "We must force this beast to leave," they wailed. The Chan monk merely smiled at them and went directly to the poisonous dragon's cave. Standing in the cave's entrance, the monk called to the dragon, "Wise and virtuous sir, would you be kind enough to depart from your lair and find refuge in a more distant place?" "Well," said the dragon, "since you have so politely asked, I will accede to your request and depart forthwith." The dragon, you see, had a fine sense of etiquette. So, away he went. From their monastery, the Arhats watched all this in absolute astonishment. Surely this monk possessed miraculous samadhi powers. As soon as the monk returned, the Arhats gathered around him and begged him to tell them about these wonderful powers. "I did not use any special meditation or samadhi," said the monk. "I simply kept the rules of discipline, and these rules stipulate that I must observe the minor requirements of courtesy as carefully as I observe the major requirements of morality." So we can see that the collective power of 500 Arhats' meditation samadhi are sometimes not the equal of one monk's simple adherence to the rules of discipline. And if you ask, why should strict attention to discipline be necessary if the mind has attained a non-judgmental state? Why should an honest and straightforward man even need to continue to practice Chan? I would ask such a man, is your mind so secure that if the lovely goddess of the moon were to come down to you and embrace you with her naked body, would your heart remain undisturbed? And you, if someone without having cause were to insult or to strike you, would you feel no anger and resentment? Can you be certain that you would always resist comparing yourself to others, or that you would always refrain from being judgmental? Can you be sure that you would always know right from wrong? Now, if you are absolutely certain that you would never yield to temptation, that you would never err at all, then open your mouth and speak loud and clear. Otherwise, do not even whisper a lie. As regards the third requirement of having a firm belief in one's Buddhist self, please know that faith is the mother, the nourishing source of our determination to submit to training and to perform our religious duties. If we seek liberation from the travails of this world, we must have a firm faith in the Buddha's assurance that each living being on earth possesses Tathagata wisdom and, therefore, has the potential of attaining Buddhahood. What prevents us from realizing this wisdom and attaining this Buddhahood? The answer is that we simply do not have faith in his assurances. We prefer to remain in ignorance of this truth, to accept the false as genuine, and to dedicate our lives to satisfying all our foolish cravings. Ignorance of the truth is a disease. Now, as the Buddha taught, the Dharma is like a hospital that has many doors. We can open any one of them and enter into a place of cure. But we must have faith in our physicians and in the efficacy of the treatment. Whenever he wanted to illustrate the problems which doubt and lack of faith cause, the Buddha would relate the parable of the physician. He would ask, suppose you were wounded by a poisoned arrow, and a friend brought a physician to help you. Would you say to your friend "No, no, I'm not going to let this fellow touch me until I find out who shot me. I want to know the culprit's name, address, and so forth. That's important, isn't it? And I want to know more about this arrow. Is the tip stone or iron, bone or horn? And what about the wooden shaft? Is it oak or elm or pine? What kind of sinew has been used to secure the tip to the shaft? Is it the sinew of an ox, a monkey, or a ruru deer? And what kind of feathers are in the shaft? Are they from a heron or a hawk? And what about the poison that's been used? I want to know what kind it is. And who is this fellow, anyway? Are you sure he's a qualified doctor? After all, I don't want a quack to treat me. I think I have a right to know these things, don't you? So, please answer my questions or I'll not let the man touch me." "Well," said the Buddha, "before you could get your questions answered to your satisfaction, you would be dead. So, dear friends, when you find yourself suffering from the ills of the world, trust in the great physician. He has cured millions of others. Which believer has ever perished in his care? Which believer has failed to be restored to eternal life and happiness by following his regimen? None. All have benefited. And so will you if you have faith in his methods. Faith is a kind of skill that you can develop. If, for example, you wish to make bean curd, you begin by boiling and grinding the soybeans, and then you add a solution of gypsum powder or lemon juice to the boiled beans. You know that you can stand there, if you wish, and watch the curds form. You have faith in your method because it always works. Thus you gain the feeling of certainty. Of course, the first time that you made bean curd, assuming that you were completely unfamiliar with its production, you may have lacked faith in the method. You might have been filled with doubt that gypsum or lemon water would cause the boiled beans to form curds. But once you succeeded and saw with your own eyes that the recipe was correct and that the procedure worked, you accepted without reservation the prescribed method. Your faith in the method was established. Therefore, we must all have faith that we each have a Buddha nature, and that we can encounter this Buddha nature if we diligently follow a proper Dharma path. If we are afraid, we should also remember Master Yongjia's words recorded in his Song of Enlightenment. In the Tathagata's real world neither egos, rules, nor hells exist. No samsaric evils may be found there. If I'm lying, you can pull my tongue out and stuff my mouth with sand, and leave it that way throughout eternity. No one ever pulled Master Yongjia's tongue out. As regards the fourth prerequisite, being resolute in our determination to succeed in whichever method we have chosen, please let me warn you about the folly of jumping around from method to method. Think of the Dharma as a mountain you must climb. There are many paths which lead to the summit. Choose one and stay with it. It will lead you there. But you will never get to the top if you race around the mountain trying one path, and then rejecting it in favor of another that looks easier. You will circle the mountain many times, but you will never climb it. Stay with your chosen method. Be absolutely faithful to it. In Chan we always tell stories about purchased devils. One particular story is very appropriate here. One day a fellow was strolling through the marketplace when he came to a stall that said, "For sale. First-class devils." Of course, the man was intrigued. "Wouldn't you be?" "I would." "Let me see one of these devils," he said to the merchant. The devil was a strange little creature rather like a monkey. "He's really quite intelligent," said the merchant. "And all you have to do is tell him each morning what you want him to accomplish that day, and he will do it." "Anything?" asked the man. "Yes," said the merchant, "anything. All your household chores will be finished by the time you get home from work." Now the man happened to be a bachelor, and so the devil sounded like a pretty good investment. "I'll take it," he said. And he paid the merchant. "There's just one little thing," said the merchant. "There's always just one little thing, isn't there? You must be faithful in telling him what to do each day. Never omit this. Give him his instructions every morning and all will be well. Remember to keep to this routine." The man agreed and took his devil home, and every morning he told him to do the dishes and the laundry, and to clean the house and prepare the dinner, and by the time he returned from work, everything was accomplished in the most wonderful manner. But then the man's birthday came and his friends at work decided to give him a party. He got very drunk and stayed in town overnight at a friend's house, and went directly to work the following morning. He never returned home to tell his devil what to do. And when he returned home that night he discovered that his devil had burned down his house and was dancing around the smoking ruins. And isn't this what always happens? When we take up a practice we vow with our blood that we will hold to it faithfully. But then the first time we set it down and neglect it, we bring disaster to it. It's as though we never had a practice at all. So, regardless of whether you choose the path of mantra or yantra or breath counting or a watu or repeating the Buddha's name, stay with your method. If it doesn't deliver you today, try again tomorrow. Tell yourself that you will be so determined that if you have to continue your practice in the next life, you will do so in order to succeed. Old Master Wei Shan used to say, "Stay with your chosen practice. Take as many reincarnations as you need to attain Buddhahood." I know it's easy to become discouraged when we think we're not making progress. We try, but when enlightenment doesn't come, we want to give up the struggle. Perseverance is itself an accomplishment. Be steadfast and patient. You're not alone in your struggle. According to ancient wisdom, we train for dreary eons for enlightenment that occurs in a flashing instant. As we conclude this episode of Empty Cloud featuring the teachings of Zhu Yun, we extend our heartfelt gratitude for your attentive listening. We look forward to welcoming you in the next episode. Your support in the form of likes and shares plays a crucial role in spreading the wisdom of Buddha to a broader audience. Your active participation is greatly appreciated, as it helps illuminate the path to enlightenment for all. Thank you for being a part of this spiritual journey.